Hey everyone, today we're opening a 1970s lunchbox and looking at the snacks children could recognize before the lid was fully raised. A wax paper wrapped sandwich, a dented thermos, a small bag of chips, and if negotiations had gone well at the supermarket, one bright package containing a hostess cake. These were the years when the pantry shelf and the school cafeteria began filling with more individually wrapped treats, each one promising softness, sweetness, and a few minutes of lunch table importance. A child might forget the apple at the bottom of the box but not the Twinkie tucked beside it. And a ho-ho with its chocolate coating and visible spiral looked less like something packed by a tired parent and more like a private dessert somehow approved for noon. Today we're revisiting 25 forgotten or changed 1970s snacks that children asked for traded for hid from siblings, and occasionally crushed beneath a library book before they ever got the chance to eat them. If these old grocery shelves, lunchboxes, and family snack rituals bring back memories, you can like the video and subscribe to Forgotten American Home, where we revisit the foods, kitchen habits, and household traditions that once seemed ordinary. Which 1970s snack did you ask for most often? And what treat did your family keep for school lunches, road trips, or the hour after you came home? For this list, a snack earns its place not simply because it was sweet or popular, but because it created a recognizable household scene, a request made beside the grocery cart, a wrapper opened under a cafeteria table, a brother counting how many were left in the box, or a parent saying those were for lunches and discovering by Wednesday that half had disappeared. The first two belonged together because they occupied the same emotional territory. Twinkies and ho-hos were not just cakes. They were small, portable arguments in favor of dessert before the final school bell. The Twinkie usually announced itself through shape before flavor. It was a neat golden sponge cake rounded at the ends with a pale cream filling hidden inside, and a wrapper that made the cake look sealed away from the ordinary hazards of a lunchbox. Beside a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper, the Twinkie seemed remarkably modern. It did not need slicing a plate, a fork, or a mother standing nearby with a dish towel. It could survive the trip from kitchen counter to school desk, although survive depended on where the lunchbox had been placed, and whether someone had used it as an emergency seat on the bus. Children learned to open the wrapper carefully, because a cake that soft could leave part of itself behind. The first bite compressed the sponge, the filling appeared, and for a moment the school day became easier to negotiate. Some families bought multi-packs regularly. Others treated them as an occasional grocery day luxury, the sort of item requested while a parent compared prices and quietly calculated how many lunches still remained before payday. That calculation mattered. Individually wrapped snack cakes saved time in the morning, but convenience did not make them invisible to the family budget. A box had to last. One cake per lunch was the usual arithmetic, and children understood that arithmetic well enough to search for exceptions. Perhaps Friday deserved two. Perhaps a friend was coming over. Perhaps the package had already been opened, which in childhood lore sometimes meant the contents were in immediate danger of becoming stale, and therefore required assistance. The pantry or bread box became a site of quiet surveillance. Parents might place the cakes on a high shelf behind cereal, or beside items children considered too boring to investigate. None of these defenses was perfect. The Twinkie's appeal came partly from its texture and sweetness, but also from its predictability. Homemade cake changed from batch to batch. A slice could crumble, dry at the edges, or arrive with frosting attached permanently to the wrapping. The packaged cake promised the same soft bite every time, a reassurance that children valued more than adults often admitted. If the Twinkie was a soft golden secret, the ho-ho displayed its engineering proudly. The chocolate-coated roll revealed a spiral of cake and cream, turning an ordinary lunch table snack into something that looked carefully constructed. Children could unroll it, bite straight through it, or peel away the chocolate coating in small pieces before eating the cake beneath. Each method created its own mess. The coating softened against warm fingers, flakes collected on notebook paper, and the final bite sometimes carried the faint taste of whatever the child had touched during recess. Still, the ho-ho felt sophisticated. It resembled a miniature bakery roll, but it arrived in a wrapper, needed no refrigeration during the school morning, and fit beside the sandwich without asking the lunchbox to reorganize itself. The spiral also made the inside visible. There was no need to trust that filling existed somewhere in the center. The evidence was right there, curling through the cake like a promise printed in cream. At home, ho-hos often lived in the same guarded territory as other special treats. A pantry shelf above eye level, a cabinet near the refrigerator, or a box placed behind something supposedly discouraging such as bran cereal. They appeared after school with a glass of milk during Saturday cartoons or in a paper bag packed for a family drive. They could be shared, although shared sometimes meant one child broke a roll in half and then spent several minutes comparing the pieces for fairness. Their chocolate surface made them feel richer than a plain cookie, while their size kept them within the boundaries of what a parent could call a snack instead of an event. That was the genius of the lunchbox cake in the 1970s. It transformed a factory-made product into a small family privilege controlled by shopping day pantry rules and the person who packed lunch before sunrise. Yet chocolate and cream were only the beginning. On another shelf waited a round cake wrapped in foil, compact enough to hide beneath a sandwich and memorable enough to inspire more than one regional name. The foil circle sat beneath the sandwich like something more valuable than lunch. Before it was opened, the cake announced itself through the thin metallic wrapper, smooth in some places, wrinkled around the edges, and capable of reflecting the cafeteria lights when a child lifted it from the box. Inside waited a ding-dong, a compact round chocolate cake covered in a dark coating and filled with sweet cream. Its shape mattered. A Twinkie looked like a snack, and a ho-ho looked like a miniature bakery roll, but this looked like a complete dessert reduced to the size of a child's palm. There was no exposed edge, no frosting pressed against wax paper, and no need to divide it into polite slices. The foil made the cake feel protected, private, and slightly ceremonial. Even before the first bite unwrapping, it produced a little performance, especially at a lunch table where 3 nearby children had already noticed exactly what had been packed. Opening the wrapper required patience that hunger did not always provide. The foil could be peeled back neatly, creating a silver plate beneath the cake, or it could be torn open from the middle and flattened with little concern for presentation. On a cold morning, the chocolate coating might remain firm enough to crack faintly beneath the teeth. On a warm afternoon, it softened against fingertips and left brown marks on notebook covers, shirt cuffs, and the handle of the lunchbox. The cake itself was soft and dark with a pale center that appeared only after the first bite. That hidden filling gave the snack part of its appeal. Children knew it was there, but the exact amount remained uncertain until the cake was opened. A generous pocket of cream could make one package seem better than another, even when both had come from the same box. This was serious lunchtime research performed without pencils, charts, or any adult supervision whatsoever. The round cake also invited negotiation. A child with a ding-dong possessed something that could be traded whole, divided into halves, or guarded with both hands while other offers were considered. 2 cookies might not be enough. A bruised banana certainly was not enough. Potato chips could enter the discussion, but only if the bag still contained more chips than air. Some children ate the chocolate shell first, nibbling around the outside until the cake looked strangely unfinished. Others pressed a finger into the centre, searching for cream and creating a result that was less elegant than expected. Most simply bit straight through the coating cake and filling, which was the quickest route and therefore the most popular. The snack was small enough to disappear in several bites, yet rich enough to make those bites feel separate from the rest of lunch. The sandwich handled hunger. The round chocolate cake handled morale. At home, the carton represented a different kind of arithmetic. Individually wrapped cakes were convenient for school mornings, but a family with several children could empty a box with alarming speed. A parent might buy them for weekday lunches and place them in a pantry cabinet with clear instructions. 1 per child. School days only. Do not open the new box because there is already an open box. These rules were simple, reasonable, and therefore frequently tested. The sound of foil carried surprisingly well through a quiet kitchen. A child attempting an unauthorized afternoon snack might open the wrapper, slowly pausing whenever the refrigerator motor stopped or footsteps crossed the hallway. The effort rarely made the operation silent. Foil does not understand secrecy. It crackles with the confidence of a material that assumes an adult is about to enter the room. For parents, the appeal was more practical. The cake required no cutting, no container, and no concern that frosting would attach itself permanently to a paper napkin. It could be placed beside a sandwich before work, before school, and often before the person packing lunch had fully awakened. The wrapper kept crumbs contained until the child opened it, which was more than could be said for many homemade desserts. Packaged cakes also offered consistency. A homemade chocolate cake might be superior at the dinner table, but a square cut from it could dry at the edges, lean against the thermos, or lose half its icing to the wrapping before noon. The ding-dong arrived already portioned and sealed. It represented the growing promise that the supermarket could remove one small step from a crowded household schedule. The product did not prepare the sandwich, locate the missing permission slip, or convince anyone to wear a coat, but it did complete the dessert compartment with impressive efficiency. Not every household bought these cakes, and not every child considered them ordinary. For some families, packaged snack cakes appeared only during road trips, vacations, or the grocery week when a coupon made the box easier to justify. That scarcity increased their power. A foil-wrapped cake discovered in a lunchbox could mean that a parent had remembered a request, chosen a favourite, or decided that an otherwise ordinary Tuesday deserved something extra. Children rarely described the moment in those terms. They simply opened the foil and ate the evidence. The cake may have come from a factory, but the decision to place it beside the sandwich happened in a kitchen, often early in the morning, under a cabinet light while someone counted lunches and tried to make the box last until Friday. On the shelf nearby waited another kind of sandwich, this one made from 2 soft oatmeal cookies with a layer of cream between them, and it offered parents the useful illusion that a dessert containing oats had already begun to behave responsibly. 2 soft oatmeal cookies pressed around a white layer of cream could make a lunchbox look more carefully planned than it really was. The Little Debbie oatmeal creme pie was flat round, slightly sticky at the edges, and flexible enough to bend before it broke. Its surface carried the ridges and darker flecks that suggested oats brown sugar, and something closer to home baking than the smooth chocolate shell of the snack cakes beside it on the grocery shelf. Parents could look at the oatmeal and feel that the cookie was at least making an effort. Children looked directly at the cream filling and reached a much faster conclusion. Wrapped individually and packed in a family-size carton, the pies travelled easily from pantry to lunchbox, from kitchen drawer to station wagon, and from an after-school snack plate to the pocket of a child who'd been told to eat it at the table. The wrapper made that instruction portable. The crumbs made it enforceable. The first decision was whether to eat the pie whole or separate it into its working parts. A child could twist the two cookies apart, although the soft texture made the operation less precise than opening a sandwich cookie with crisp wafers. Most of the cream usually chose one side. The other cookie was left exposed slightly darker where the filling had touched it, and temporarily less important. Some children licked away the centre before eating the oatmeal layers. Others folded the entire pie, squeezing the cream toward the edges and creating a snack twice as thick and considerably less tidy. A few took small bites around the outside, saving the middle for last, as though the cream were a valuable mineral found beneath several inches of cookie. Every method left evidence. Fine crumbs collected in the folds of a shirt. A trace of filling remained on a fingertip. The wrapper, once smooth and printed, became a crumpled square pushed into the corner of the lunchbox beside an apple that had survived another day without serious attention. Its texture separated the oatmeal cream pie from many other packaged cookies. It was not crisp enough to snap cleanly, or sturdy enough to remain unchanged beneath the thermos. The cookies were soft, chewy, and sometimes slightly compressed by noon, especially if the lunchbox had travelled beneath books or been dropped near the coat hooks. Yet the flattening rarely damaged the essential experience. The filling stayed between the cookies, the sweetness remained dependable, and the entire snack could be eaten without requiring a plate. That reliability mattered in households where mornings moved quickly. Someone had to make sandwiches, pour cereal, sign school papers, locate lunch money, and determine which child had taken the only clean thermos cup. Reaching into a carton and adding one wrapped pie removed a decision. It was dessert already measured, already enclosed, and already familiar enough that no one needed to ask whether the child would eat it. The carton itself became part of family snack management. It might sit in the pantry near cracker cereal, peanut butter, and the bag of cookies intended for company. The individually wrapped pies looked plentiful when the box was first opened. By the middle of the week, the empty spaces told another story. In a home with several children, the final pie could acquire the importance of inherited property. Everyone remembered seeing two the day before. No one remembered eating the missing one. A parent who had purchased the carton for lunches might begin counting wrappers or moving the box to a higher shelf. This did not always work. Children were capable climbers when the objective was specific enough, and an oatmeal cream pie was a far more persuasive objective than putting away dishes. The product promised convenience, but it also created a small household economy in which each wrapped piece had an intended day, an expected owner, and a surprising ability to disappear before either arrived. Television advertising and supermarket displays helped turn these cakes into recognizable requests, but the decision to buy them still belonged to the grocery budget. They were practical, partly because a carton offered several portions that could be distributed across school days, road trips, and afternoon snacks. For some families they were routine. For others they appeared only when on sale, when a coupon had been clipped from the newspaper, or when a parent wanted an easy treat for a crowded week. Experiences also varied by region, income, and shopping access. One child might find an oatmeal creme pie beside the sandwich every Tuesday. Another encountered it only at a friend's house, where the pantry seemed mysteriously stocked with snacks that never appeared at home. That difference could make the pie even more memorable. Foods eaten regularly become part of the furniture. Foods eaten rarely remain sharply outlined, wrapper and all. The oatmeal in the name gave the snack an unusually respectable costume. It sounded closer to breakfast than candy, and the brown cookie surface looked less extravagant than a chocolate coating or brightly coloured frosting. No child was fooled into believing it was a bowl of oatmeal, but adults could place it beside a glass of milk and call the arrangement a snack with a straight face. That small balance between indulgence and practicality suited the decade's growing market for packaged family foods. The pie was sweet, inexpensive enough for many households to consider, and sturdy enough for ordinary travel. It also resembled something that might have come from a home kitchen, though few homemade oatmeal cookies arrived in perfectly matched pairs with the uniform white centre. The factory had taken a familiar flavour, softened it, filled it, wrapped it, and made it available at the exact moment a child came through the door announcing starvation 20 minutes before dinner. Years later, many people remember the oatmeal creme pie less as a remarkable dessert than as part of a repeated scene. The pantry door opening after school, the refrigerator humming nearby, a glass filling with milk, and the wrapper crackling while homework remained untouched on the table. Its importance came from repetition, from being present during ordinary afternoons that no one expected to miss. The snack did not need candles, a holiday, or a special plate. It belonged to bus rides, brown paper bags, weekend errands, and the quiet reward placed beside a sandwich by someone packing lunch early in the morning. But on another lunch tray, sweetness arrived without cookies or cake at all. It sat inside a small metal cup sealed beneath a lid, waiting for the child who'd remembered to bring a spoon. The small metal pudding cup carried more weight than its size suggested. It was cool against the fingers, slightly heavier than a paper dessert container, and sealed beneath a lid that had to be lifted without bending it sharply enough to splash chocolate onto a school shirt. Inside snack pack pudding waited with a dense glossy surface that barely moved when the cup was tilted. Chocolate was the flavour many children hoped to find, though vanilla butterscotch, and other varieties also appeared in lunchboxes and pantry cabinets. The cup looked modern, compact, and almost indestructible, compared with homemade pudding spooned into a glass dish. It did not require refrigeration before opening, did not leak easily, and could survive a morning beside a sandwich, an orange, and a thermos that had already lost one small battle with the lunchbox hinge. It did, however, require one essential piece of equipment. Without a spoon, the entire arrangement became a test of character ingenuity and how close a child was willing to stand to the cafeteria supervisor, remembering the spoon was usually the responsibility of the person packing lunch, but discovering its absence belonged entirely to the child. The realization often came after the lid had been peeled back and the pudding's smooth surface was already exposed. A borrowed spoon might be available from the cafeteria, though asking for one meant admitting that the home lunch had arrived incomplete. A friend might offer a plastic utensil saved from another meal, usually with conditions attached. In less dignified situations, the lid itself could be folded into a narrow scoop, although its edges were not designed for comfort, and its carrying capacity was optimistic at best. Some children used a clean finger when no adult was watching. Others tried to drink the pudding directly from the cup, discovering that thick chocolate dessert does not flow with the cooperation of milk. The package promised convenience, but convenience had limits, and one of them was shaped like a teaspoon. When everything was present, opening the cup became part of the pleasure. The lid lifted with a soft metallic crackle, revealing a darker layer of pudding beneath. A small amount often clung to the underside, and no sensible child considered that portion waste. The first spoonful was cool or room temperature, depending on where the lunchbox had spent the morning, and the texture was thicker than many homemade puddings served warm from the stove. It held its shape briefly on the spoon before settling back into itself. The metal rim had to be approached carefully, especially when scraping the last streaks from the sides. Children learned to angle the spoon around the cup, chasing the thin layer left behind until only faint brown marks remained. The empty container then became an object with possibilities. It could be tapped against the table, stacked with another cup used to hold small treasures, or crushed slightly before being returned to the lunchbox, where the remaining spoon would later coat everything it touched unless wrapped in a napkin. At home, pudding cups occupied an unusual place between pantry staple and special treat. They could sit on a shelf without taking up refrigerator space, which made them useful in households where lunch preparation happened quickly and cold storage was already crowded with milk leftovers and dinner ingredients. A parent could place one beside a sandwich in seconds, confident that the dessert would arrive in roughly the same condition in which it had left the kitchen. Homemade pudding required cooking, stirring, cooling serving dishes, and washing a saucepan whose bottom might cling stubbornly to the final layer. The packaged cup replaced that work with a peelable lid and one spoon. It did not claim to be a family recipe, it claimed to be ready. During a decade increasingly filled with individually portioned foods, that readiness mattered to parents balancing school mornings, jobs, errands, and several children leaving the house at slightly different times. The metal package also made the pudding feel more substantial than many soft desserts. It could not be squeezed like a plastic cup, and it did not collapse when pressed beneath a book. The smooth sides and printed label gave it the appearance of a miniature canned good intended for one person. For children, that individual ownership was important. A bowl of pudding at home might be divided by an adult with one sibling watching carefully to see whether another portion appeared larger. A sealed cup eliminated the argument. Everyone received one container, one lid, and one clearly defined amount. Of course, this fairness lasted only until someone traded vanilla for chocolate or discovered that another child's cup had been chilled overnight. Lunchbox culture had its own economy, and flavours did not carry equal value. Chocolate usually negotiated from a position of strength. Butterscotch attracted loyal supporters. Vanilla often depended on good manners and favourable market conditions. Not every family bought individual pudding cups regularly. Some mixed pudding from a box made it on the stove or served dessert only after dinner, rather than placing it in a school lunch. Others reserved packaged cups for field trips, long car rides, or weeks when convenience mattered more than usual. School experiences varied too. In some cafeterias, a home-packed pudding cup looked ordinary. In others, it drew attention because most children bought lunch or carried simpler desserts. The memory therefore belongs not only to the product but to the circumstance around it. The sound of the lid, the borrowed spoon, the chocolate streak on a napkin, and the careful scraping that continued after the bell warning children to finish eating. The cup was small, but no child who wanted every last spoonful considered the final corners unimportant. As packaging changed in later years, the old metal cup gradually became part of the memory itself. Newer containers were lighter, easier to handle, and less likely to leave a sharp edge, but they did not make the same sound when opened or feel as cool and solid in the hand. The dessert survived. The ritual changed. For many people, the remembered taste of the pudding is still connected to that little container and the spoon that had to be packed beside it. Yet the next snacks offered no need for utensils and very little chance of being eaten quietly. One crackled inside the mouth like a pocketful of tiny fireworks. The other stretched caramel across an unusually long wrapper and challenged a child to believe that a candy bar could last. The packet looked too small to create so much noise. Pop Rocks entered the mouth as brightly coloured pieces of hard candy, but they did not behave like ordinary candy for long. As moisture dissolved, the sugar-trapped carbon dioxide escaped in a rapid series of tiny pops, snaps, and prickling bursts against the tongue. A child could hear the candy inside his own head, which made the experience feel private and wonderfully public at the same time. Friends leaned closer. Mouths opened for demonstrations. Someone insisted that his packet was popping louder than everyone else's. The flavour mattered, but the performance mattered more. Pop Rocks did not simply provide sugar after school or at the corner store. They provided an event small enough to carry in a pocket, dramatic enough to interrupt a playground conversation, and strange enough to make adults suspicious before they had even tasted one. Eating them required a method. A cautious child poured a few crystals into one palm and tipped them carefully onto the tongue. A more ambitious child emptied much of the packet at once, closed his mouth, and waited for the internal commotion. The candy crackled against teeth and cheeks, sometimes producing a sharp little pop that seemed much larger, because it happened inside the skull. Children tried chewing immediately, swallowing quickly, holding the candy beneath the tongue, or opening their mouths so nearby friends could listen. The packet itself was light and easy to hide, although its contents were less cooperative. A few pieces spilled onto car seats, kitchen tables, and the bottom of coat pockets, where they later met moisture and performed for no audience at all. Unlike a chocolate bar, Pop Rocks could not be divided neatly into equal portions. Sharing required trust, an accurately cupped hand, and a friend who understood that a little did not mean half the package. Then came the rumours. Children heard that Pop Rocks should never be eaten with soda, although explanations varied according to the imagination and scientific confidence of whoever was speaking. One version involved a stomachache, another involved an explosion. By the time the story crossed a school playground, it could include an ambulance, a distant cousin, and a child from another town whose identity was never available for questioning. The rumours were false, but they became almost as memorable as the candy. Pop Rocks were made by trapping carbon dioxide inside hard candy, and the gas released as the pieces dissolved. That ordinary explanation had little chance against a story whispered beside the bicycle rack. For parents, the rumours created one more decision in the grocery aisle. For children, they made the candy seem forbidden even when it had just been purchased with parental permission. Few advertising campaigns could have designed a stronger invitation. The excitement lasted only a few moments, which was both the weakness and the genius of the candy. A packet could vanish quickly, leaving behind sweetness, a tingling tongue, and the feeling that something larger had just occurred. There was no wrapper full of crumbs to save for later, and no final bite to postpone. Once the popping stopped, it stopped completely. The child shook the packet, checked the corners, and searched for one last crystal capable of producing another snap. This made Pop Rocks different from the other snacks in the pantry. They were not meant to quiet hunger or accompany milk. They were purchased because they did something. In the 1970s marketplace, where novelty shapes, bold packages, and television-friendly demonstrations competed for children's attention, candy that supplied its own sound effect had an obvious advantage. It was difficult to eat unnoticed and almost impossible to describe calmly. The marathon bar offered the opposite experience. Where Pop Rocks disappeared in a brief noisy rush, the marathon seemed built to occupy time. Its long, narrow shape stood apart from the compact rectangles near the checkout counter, and the wrapper emphasized that length as though the candy had entered a competition. Beneath the package was a braided or lattice-like strip of chewy caramel covered in milk chocolate. The open spaces in the caramel gave the bar an unusual appearance, while the length made it seem like a better bargain to a child holding a limited allowance. It was not truly endless, but compared with the standard candy bar, it appeared to continue well beyond the point at which a responsible snack should have concluded. A child could hold one end and examine the rest like a measuring device designed by someone who believed rulers needed more chocolate. The first bite corrected any idea that the bar would be easy to finish. The caramel stretched, resisted, and occasionally followed the teeth farther than expected. Chocolate flaked from the surface and softened against warm fingers, while the braided center demanded chewing rather than simple swallowing. That resistance was part of the appeal. Children wanted a candy bar to last, especially when it had been purchased with their own coins, and the marathon required commitment. It could be eaten steadily, broken into smaller sections, or folded inside its wrapper, and saved, though caramel had a talent for attaching itself to paper and making future plans complicated. Sharing was possible, but dividing the bar evenly depended on where the braid broke. One child inevitably received a longer section. Another inspected both pieces with the seriousness of a surveyor reviewing a property dispute. At the grocery checkout, the marathon bar made its argument visually. It looked longer, more unusual, and more entertaining than the ordinary bars beside it. A child did not need to understand the economics of candy manufacturing to believe that length meant value. Parents, however, understood that a long candy bar remained a candy bar no matter how educational the wrapper's measurement marks appeared. The request might be denied because dinner was close, because candy had already been chosen that week, or because several children were asking at once and fairness threatened to double the cost. When permission came, the bar became part snack and part project, something to unwrap slowly in the back seat or carry outside with friends. Pop Rocks made children stop and listen. The marathon made them settle in and chew. One offered a few explosive seconds, the other a long caramel negotiation, and both proved that the most memorable 1970s candy often sold an experience before it sold a flavor. On the next pantry shelf, another package promised an experience even farther from the kitchen, a chewy stick that let an ordinary child imagine lunch had been packed for outer space. The stick looked less like a conventional snack than a piece of equipment. It was narrow brown, individually wrapped and shaped for efficiency, rather than bakery window beauty. Depending on the box, a child might expect chocolate caramel or peanut butter flavor, though the texture often made the first impression before the taste did. Space food sticks were dense and chewy, with none of the crumbs of a cookie and none of the soft cream hidden inside a snack cake. They could be held in one hand, eaten slowly, and carried without a spoon bowl or napkin, unless the wrapper had spent too long in a warm car. In a 1970s kitchen filled with cereal boxes, canned juice, concentrate aluminum ice trays and the hum of the refrigerator, the package offered something extraordinary. A child did not have to leave the Formica table to imagine joining a space mission. All that was required was one wrapped stick, a glass of milk, and a willingness to believe that astronauts ate snacks remarkably similar to brown modelling clay. The connection to space was more than a decoration invented for the grocery aisle. Pillsbury had worked on compact safe foods for American aerospace programs, where crumbs, spoilage, and awkward shapes could become serious problems rather than minor kitchen annoyances. Research into food that could be handled under unusual conditions helped lead to the rod-shaped product, later adapted for ordinary consumers. Commercial space food sticks even travelled aboard Apollo-era spacecraft, although the versions sold to families were adjusted for supermarket tastes and everyday eating. That history gave the box an authority few children's snacks could match. A cookie could promise chocolate chips, a cereal could promise a prize. Space food sticks seemed to promise participation in the future. The child eating one after school was still seated beneath a kitchen clock perhaps, with muddy sneakers near the back door and unfinished arithmetic on the table. But the wrapper suggested that the same basic idea belonged somewhere beyond the atmosphere. Opening the package did not create the drama of Pop Rocks, or the shining ceremony of a foil-wrapped cake. The wrapper separated with a small tear, and the stick emerged looking practical, compact, and determined not to shed crumbs on sensitive equipment. That crumb resistance also made sense in a station wagon lunchbox or coat pocket. A mother could pack one beside a sandwich without worrying that it would break into a layer of dust beneath the thermos. A child could eat it during a bicycle ride on the school bus, or while watching an afternoon television program about astronauts and rockets. The chewiness slowed everything down. One bite required more work than a bite of sponge cake, and the stick could last long enough to feel substantial. Whether every child enjoyed that texture is another matter. Some remembered the product fondly, others admired the box more than the contents. Even in the space age, Marketing could travel farther than flavour. Parents were given a different reason to approve. Space food sticks were promoted not merely as candy, but as a compact food with nutritional value, a miniature meal for busy moments. That description placed them in a useful middle territory. They were sweet enough to attract children, portable enough to satisfy adults, and serious-looking enough to avoid standing beside ordinary candy bars in the family imagination. A parent rushing through breakfast cleanup could place one in a lunchbox and feel that the snack had arrived with scientific credentials. It required no refrigeration, produced little mess, and offered a measured portion. Yet the same household arithmetic still applied. The box contained a limited supply, and the sticks purchased for school lunches were not automatically available to anyone opening the pantry after dinner. A product designed for extreme aerospace conditions could still be defeated by 3 children coming home hungry at the same time. The name itself began changing as the decade moved forward. Pillsbury gradually reduced the emphasis on the word space and sold the product more simply as food sticks, partly because public excitement surrounding the space program was shifting, and partly because some shoppers associated astronaut food with something dry, strange, or more admirable than delicious. Children were less concerned with marketing strategy. Many continued using the old name because space food sticks made a much better playground description than food sticks, which sounded like something issued during an emergency. The change revealed how quickly the future could become ordinary. At the beginning of the era, eating like an astronaut carried the glow of moon missions and technological possibility. A few years later, the same chewy bar had to compete with louder flavours, brighter packages, and snacks whose excitement was visible without explanation. That competition was difficult. Space food sticks asked children to imagine. Other products allowed them to see the novelty immediately in a shape, coating, colour, or container. As interest faded, the sticks eventually slipped from regular grocery shelves, leaving behind an idea that survived more successfully than the original snack. Later generations would become familiar with compact nutrition bars, energy bars, and meal replacement snacks carried to schoolwork hiking trails and gym bags. The space food stick had arrived before those shelves became crowded, wearing a space program identity that made practical eating feel adventurous. For the children who remember them, the flavour may be less vivid than the box, the wrapper, and the feeling of holding a small piece of the future in an ordinary kitchen. The next snack needed no rocket connection to look engineered. It arrived in a tall cylindrical can, and every potato crisp inside curved as though a machine had taught the entire stack to salute. The tall can did not behave like an ordinary bag of chips. It stood upright in the pantry beside cereal boxes and canned goods protected by a plastic lid, and shaped more like a container for tennis balls than a place to keep a snack. When the lid came off, there was another seal to open, followed by the first view of a pale, orderly stack. Every Pringle carried nearly the same curved shape nested into the one below it, with a precision that made ordinary potato chips look undisciplined. There were no large folded pieces, no dark edges, and very few crumbs hiding at the bottom before the can had even been opened. To a child in the 1970s, the arrangement seemed strangely modern. The snack had not simply been placed inside a package. It had been organised. One crisp could be lifted from the top, examined from both sides, and eaten with the confidence that another almost identical one waited directly beneath it. The shape invited experiments before flavour received full attention. A child could place one crisp against the tongue and let it soften, bite it cleanly across the middle, or balance two pieces between the lips to create a duck-like bill. Few food manufacturers advertised that final use as a household benefit, but children discovered it immediately. The curve also made each piece feel more substantial than a flat cracker, even though the crisp itself was thin and fragile. Salt and seasoning settled across the surface while the potato flavour arrived in a form smoother and more uniform than a conventional chip cut from a whole potato. Pringles were made from a potato-based mixture shaped into consistent pieces, which helped explain why one crisp resembled the next so closely. Children did not need the manufacturing explanation. They simply understood that the can contained fewer surprises. The top crisp looked good. The 10th looked good. The one near the bottom looked good until a hand reached too quickly and broke 3 others on the way down. Reaching into the can became increasingly difficult as the stack disappeared. At first, the top crisps could be removed with 2 fingers and no effort. Halfway down, the hand entered farther, the wrist turned, and the container began to resemble a narrow mechanical problem. Younger children sometimes tipped the can and allowed several crisps to slide into one palm, which worked until too many arrived at once, and the top layer landed on the floor. Others shook the can gently, listening to the stack move and hoping the next crisp would rise within reach. The boldest method involved tilting the entire container toward the mouth. This could deliver one crisp with impressive efficiency, or release a sudden avalanche across a shirt. The package solved the problem of crushed chips during transport, then created a new problem involving arm length. Convenience had advanced. Human anatomy had not. For parents, the cylinder offered practical advantages. A conventional bag could be squeezed beneath groceries, opened carelessly, and reduced to fragments before it reached the pantry. The Pringles can protected its contents on the ride home, and could be closed again after snack time at least when someone remembered to replace the lid. It fit neatly on a shelf and did not collapse as the contents disappeared. A child could carry it to the living room, the back porch, or the family station wagon without holding the top shut with a clothespin. But the can also made it easy to lose track of how much had been eaten. A bowl displayed its emptiness honestly. A tall container kept the remaining supply hidden. A child could continue reaching inside while watching television and remain genuinely surprised when fingers touched only the bottom. The claim that someone had eaten just a few became difficult to defend when the stack had dropped several inches. The grocery request often began with the package itself. On a supermarket shelf filled with flexible chip bags, the tall cylinder was easy to recognize from a distance. Its shape suggested that something different was happening inside, and the neat stack could be shown in advertising without the broken pieces and irregular edges found in a real bag after a trip home. Children wanted the can partly because the snack was enjoyable, and partly because the container offered a ritual: lift the lid, peel the seal, smell the salted crisps, and reveal a stack that looked untouched by gravity or grocery carts. Parents still had to compare price size and how long the snack was likely to last. In a large family, a single can could pass through several hands during one television program. The resealable lid promised future freshness. The children promised to leave some for tomorrow. One of those promises was more dependable than the other. Pringles also represented the changing idea of what a potato snack could be. Traditional chips carried visible signs of the potato. They came from uneven shapes, browned spots, curled edges, and occasional thick pieces that required extra chewing. The formed crisp replaced that variation with consistency. Some people loved the uniform texture and tidy stack. Others preferred the rougher crunch and stronger potato character of chips from a bag. The difference gave families one more small grocery preference to debate. Children often cared less about classification than adults did. To them, the crisp was salty portable and entertaining enough to wear briefly before eating. The can might later survive in the bedroom, holding pencils, coins, toy parts, or objects whose original purpose had been forgotten. A package designed to protect identical crisps became a household container long after the final crumbs had been shaken out, By the end of the decade, the tall can had helped make uniformity feel like a feature rather than a lack of character. It promised that the snack at the bottom would resemble the one at the top provided it survived the journey of the searching hand. The memory remains tied to the hollow sound of the lid coming off the scrape of fingernails against the inner wall, and the careful tilt used to recover the last unbroken piece. Yet the next pantry shelf was much less orderly. There, triangular chips carried bold seasoning and cheese-flavoured curls left orange fingerprints on everything they touched. Pringles kept their evidence inside the can. Doritos and Cheetos sent children back into the room wearing theirs. The triangle arrived before the flavour. Doritos looked different from the pale curved Pringles stacked in their orderly can, and different again from the thin potato chips that folded, curled and broke according to their own private decisions. These were sturdy corn chips with sharp corners, rough surfaces and enough seasoning to announce themselves the moment the bag opened. Pour them into a bowl on a 1970s coffee table, and the sound changed at once. Instead of the light rustle of potato chips, there was a harder clatter as the triangles struck one another and settled into place. Children reached for the largest pieces first, especially those carrying a heavy patch of orange or reddish seasoning. The plain-looking chip at the bottom of the bowl attracted less confidence. Doritos made flavour visible. A darker corner suggested more cheese, more spice, and therefore a better return on the effort of reaching past everyone else's hand. The shape created its own strategy. A whole triangle could be eaten point first, broken into smaller pieces or held by one corner, while the seasoned surface disappeared in several bites. The strongest chips survived dipping. The weaker ones snapped beneath too much pressure and vanished into the bowl, leaving behind a fragment that required a second chip to retrieve it. Children learned quickly that a Dorito coated in dip was no longer structurally dependable. It needed to travel from bowl to mouth without interruption. Conversation could wait. The rough corn surface held seasoning in every ridge, and the flavour remained on the fingers after the chip was gone. A child might lick each fingertip clean, wipe them on a napkin, or quietly transfer part of the evidence to blue jeans. The final method was efficient but rarely invisible. By the end of snack time, the empty bowl contained broken corners, seasoning dust, and several pieces everyone had somehow agreed were too small to count. Doritos also carried the flavour of a meal children already understood. Pizza, tacos, cheese, and other boldly seasoned foods were becoming increasingly familiar through restaurants, school menus, frozen dinners, and supermarket products, although experiences varied greatly by region and household. The tortilla chip brought some of that excitement into the pantry without asking anyone to brown meat, grate cheese, or heat an oven. A bag could appear during television at a birthday party, beside sandwiches on Saturday afternoon, or in the station wagon during a long family drive. Adults might pour a reasonable amount into a bowl. Children regarded the remaining bag as unfinished business. The scent escaped as soon as the top opened, and folding the bag closed did not make it disappear from memory. A clothespin rubber band or careful roll might preserve the contents until tomorrow, assuming tomorrow arrived before someone returned to the kitchen and decided the bag looked lonely. Cheetos left even clearer evidence. The cheese-flavoured corn pieces were lighter than Doritos' irregular in shape, and covered with a bright orange coating that seemed designed to identify every person who had touched them. Some pieces were long and narrow, others curved like hooks, branches, or tiny animals whose species could be debated until someone ate the evidence. Children searched the bag for unusually large examples and held them up for inspection before biting. The shape mattered because no two pieces seemed exactly alike. Where Pringles offered industrial order and Doritos offered dependable triangles, Cheetos offered a bag full of accidental sculptures. One piece resembled a question mark, another looked like a boot, A third looked like nothing at all until a child announced that it was clearly a dinosaur, at which point everyone was expected to respect the discovery for at least 3 seconds. The orange coating turned snack time into a practical problem. After several pieces, the fingertips developed a layer of cheese-flavoured powder that could be licked away but rarely disappeared completely. Turning a page, touching the television dial, answering the telephone or picking up a white game piece suddenly required judgment. A parent could identify the path from snack bowl to sofa by the marks left behind. Napkins helped when they were actually used, but children often considered them equipment for adults. The more natural method was to eat several Cheetos, inspect the fingers, and remove the coating one fingertip at a time. This extended the flavour and made the snack appear to last longer, though it did little for table manners. Sharing from a large bowl also required acceptance that every hand entering it would soon return carrying orange proof. The family snack bowl was communal. The fingerprints were individual. For parents, both products offered convenience with almost no preparation. Open the bag, pour the contents, and the snack was ready. There was no saucepan to wash, no frosting to protect, and no spoon to remember. The products also fit the increasingly common rhythm of casual eating outside formal mealtimes. Children came home from school hungry before dinner. Friends arrived without notice. Weekend television created long stretches during which a bowl could be passed across the living room. A bag of flavoured corn snacks answered these moments more quickly than sandwiches or homemade cookies. Yet convenience brought the usual family rules. Do not eat directly from the bag. Leave some for the others. Do not fill up before supper. Keep the bowl in the kitchen. Each instruction was sensible. Each became less powerful once the first loud crunch had been heard from the next room. The two snacks encouraged different loyalties. Doritos delivered a firm triangular crunch and a concentrated layer of seasoning. Cheetos offered lighter pieces, playful shapes, and orange fingers that remained part of the experience long after the bowl was empty. Some households kept both. Others bought whichever brand was on sale, or whichever flavour children had recently seen advertised. For a child facing the snack aisle, the choice could feel important enough to delay the entire grocery trip. The bag had to be examined, defended, and placed in the cart before an adult reconsidered. These were not quiet foods. They crackled during television, clattered into bowls, and left visible seasoning on hands, upholstery, and occasionally homework. They made the 1970s snack shelf brighter, louder, and less formal. But another seasoned corn snack once offered children an even stranger shape. It looked like a small wheel claimed to taste like pizza, and then rolled almost completely out of American grocery memory. The little wheel looked as though someone had removed it from a toy wagon, covered it with pizza seasoning, and dropped it into a snack box. Pizza spins were round, open-centered pieces with spokes radiating toward the outer edge, a shape that gave children several possible places to begin. One could bite through the rim, break off the spokes, or place the whole wheel on the tongue and allow the rough seasoning to announce itself at once. The flavour was meant to suggest pizza through a mixture that included tomato cheese pepper and familiar pizza spices, though the result belonged entirely to the snack aisle. It was dry, crunchy, and small enough to eat by the handful, with none of the stretching cheese or sliding toppings of an actual slice. That distinction did not weaken the appeal. A child could eat several pieces before an oven had even warmed, and no adult had to cut anything into equal portions. The box promised pizza without plates, napkins, or the danger of losing the best piece to an older sibling. Pizza spins had reached stores before the 1970s began, but their short life overlapped neatly with the early part of the decade. General Mills introduced them nationally in the summer of 1968, during a period when pizza flavor was spreading into more packaged foods, and American families were becoming increasingly comfortable with snacks that imitated complete meals. The product came in a colourful box rather than the flexible bags used for many chips, and an inner foil lining helped protect the crisp pieces after the package was opened. At home, that meant the box could stand upright in the pantry, beside crackers and cereal waiting for the afternoon rush. A child returning from school could open the top, unfold the inner lining and smell the seasoning before the first wheel reached the mouth. The container made the snack feel organised, but the contents quickly escaped that order. Wheels collected in bowls, spokes broke into corners, and a thin reddish dust settled at the bottom where someone would eventually tip the box and claim the final portion. The wheel shape was not only decorative, it made the snack feel like an object, something to examine and play with before eating. Children could look through the centre hole place a piece over one eye stack, several wheels on a finger, or compare which one had survived the package with all of its spokes intact. A broken pizza spin remained edible, but a perfect one carried slightly more status. It had completed the journey from factory to supermarket, from grocery bag to pantry, and from pantry to bowl without losing its geometry. That achievement deserved at least a brief inspection. The spokes also created extra edges, giving each bite a hard, irregular crunch, unlike the broad snap of a tortilla chip. If Doritos arrived as bold triangles and Cheetos as orange accidental sculptures, pizza spins looked deliberately mechanical. They seemed designed by someone who believed a snack should taste like supper and resemble a piece from a construction set. Parents may have appreciated the speed more than the shape. A bowl of pizza spins could be placed on the kitchen table while dinner was still being prepared, although that introduced the familiar risk that children would eat enough pizza-flavoured snacks to reject the actual meal waiting 20 minutes away. The box was also convenient for family drives, television evenings, neighbourhood play, and the hour after school when hunger was announced as though no lunch had been served. No heating was required, no cheese had to be grated, no saucepan collected tomato sauce around its rim. The product took one of the decade's increasingly familiar family foods and removed nearly everything except the flavour suggestion. This was convenience operating at full confidence. The package did not offer a small version of pizza. It offered a crunchy symbol of pizza and trusted the imagination to supply the rest. That imagination was helped by the changing place of pizza in American childhood. Experiences varied widely by region and family, but pizza had become more visible through restaurants, frozen products, school menus, and supermarket advertising. It felt informal, shareable, and especially suited to children, teenagers, and evenings when the dinner table relaxed its usual rules. A pizza-flavoured snack borrowed that excitement. The wheels could appear at a birthday party beside paper cups, on a coffee table during Saturday television, or in a bowl passed between friends sprawled across the living room carpet. Their seasoning was stronger than a plain cracker, and familiar enough to avoid seeming truly adventurous. A child who refused onions on a real pizza could still approve of a wheel containing a generalized idea of pizza. The snack had reduced the meal to its most persuasive argument: salt, tomato, cheese, spice, and crunch. But a memorable shape does not guarantee a permanent shelf. Pizza spins were discontinued around the middle of the 1970s, after only several years of national availability. The exact business reasons are less clearly preserved than the memories of people who wanted them back. Grocery aisles were crowded with competing chips, crackers, curls, cones, and newly intensified flavours. Some snacks built habits that lasted across generations. Others appeared during a narrow moment, attracted loyal children and vanished before those children were old enough to control the grocery cart. Pizza spins belonged to that second group. Because their disappearance came early, many younger 1970s, children never encountered them at all, while older children remembered the box with unusual sharpness. Scarcity after the fact made the memory stronger. There would be no familiar package quietly changing design over the years. The wheel simply stopped returning to the shelf. What remained was a remarkably complete household image. The cardboard box on a pantry shelf, the foil lining folded back a bowl filled with small spokes and circles, and children searching for the most heavily seasoned piece. The snack disappeared, but the idea behind it did not. Pizza flavor continued moving into crackers, chips, frozen bites, and countless after-school foods. Later products offered more cheese, softer centers, or closer imitations of a real slice, yet few looked quite like those tiny wheels. Pizza spins had turned a meal into a shape children could wear on a finger before eating. Their years in stores were brief, but that brevity is part of why they still produce such immediate recognition among the people who had them. On the next grocery shelf waited another product remembered as much for its package as its taste. Sweet yellow popcorn enclosed in a black box covered with words, jokes, and enough personality to make every neighbouring snack look unusually serious. The black box looked as though it had wandered into the snack aisle from a record shop or comedy club, or the bedroom of an older teenager who'd been allowed to decorate without supervision. Nearly every competing package used bright colours to display the food inside, but screaming yellow zonkers surrounded its yellow name, strange illustrations, and playful writing with a field of deep black. The contrast made the carton difficult to ignore. A child standing beside the grocery cart could spot it among the crackers, caramel corn and potato chips before understanding exactly what the product was. Inside waited pieces of popcorn covered in a sweet yellow glaze, glossy enough to catch the kitchen light and sticky enough to leave a faint coating on the fingers. The snack was familiar in one sense. American children already knew popcorn, yet nothing about this package wanted to seem ordinary. Even the name sounded less like food than something shouted during a cartoon emergency. Lincoln Snacks introduced screaming yellow zonkers near the end of the 1960s, and the product entered the 1970s with an identity built around being different. The popcorn was sweetened but made without the nuts found in some competing glazed popcorn mixtures, giving families another choice beside the more familiar boxes containing caramel-coated popcorn and peanuts. The black package carried bold drawings, jokes, odd instructions, and copy that rewarded anyone who turned the box around instead of simply tearing it open. Children could read while eating, and the carton seemed to understand that cereal boxes had already trained them to inspect every panel. A parent might see a container of sweet popcorn. A child saw an object that continued performing after the television commercial ended. The package did not merely announce the contents. It behaved like an additional snack, one consumed with the eyes while the yellow popcorn disappeared by the handful. Opening the box created a sequence that belonged to pantry snacks of the period. The cardboard flaps lifted first, followed by the inner package that protected the glazed popcorn from kitchen air and wandering fingers. Once opened, the smell was sweet buttery and unmistakably connected to popcorn, though the coating gave each piece more weight and shine than the kind shaken from a stovetop pan. The first handful clattered softly into a bowl, individual kernels striking the glass or plastic sides before settling into an uneven yellow pile. Some pieces were round and fully coated, others carried thin, jagged edges where the popcorn had opened. Children searched for large clusters, especially those joined together by extra glaze. One cluster could feel like several pieces won at once. The smallest fragments remained at the bottom, surrounded by yellow crumbs and hardened drops of sweetness that someone would eventually collect with a damp fingertip. Screaming yellow zonkers fit naturally into television snacking because it required no preparation and almost no attention. A bowl could be placed on the coffee table before a Saturday program passed across the sofa during a family movie, or carried downstairs when friends gathered in a panelled basement. Unlike Jiffy Pop, which demanded heat shaking and adult involvement, Zonkers arrived fully popped and already coated. There was no foil dome to watch and no scorched pan to explain. The only challenge was deciding how much to pour. Adults often chose a bowl because a bowl created a visible limit. Children preferred the box because the remaining amount stayed mysterious. A hand could disappear inside again and again until it reached much farther than expected. At that moment, the child might shake the carton beside one ear, confirming that several pieces were still travelling across the bottom, and therefore the snack could not reasonably be considered finished. The glaze created evidence almost as effectively as the orange coating on Cheetos. Fingers became slightly tacky, and crumbs attached themselves to palm shirt fronts and the upholstery of whatever chair had been declared the snack location. A child might lick the sweetness away, then immediately reach into the communal bowl with the same hand, a cycle that household etiquette was not fully prepared to regulate. Napkins were useful but easily forgotten. The popcorn could also cling briefly to the teeth, extending the flavour after the piece had disappeared. Children who tried to eat quietly during television discovered that glazed popcorn still produced a determined crunch. The package might have been filled with jokes, but the bowl supplied its own sound effects, crackling bites, kernels shifting beneath searching fingers, and the occasional hard fragment that caused everyone to pause and reconsider the confidence of the previous chew. The product's strongest attraction may have been the way it treated children as readers rather than merely appetites. The box was crowded with visual surprises and comic language, encouraging the buyer to examine it from side to side. In a decade when packaging increasingly competed for attention through mascots, games, premiums, and exaggerated promises, Screaming Yellow Zonkers used personality as its main advantage. It did not need to resemble a real meal or borrow authority from astronauts. It offered a private little world printed on cardboard. The black background even made the box feel older, stranger, and slightly more sophisticated than the cheerful packages intended for young children. A kid could request it because the popcorn was sweet, then continue defending the choice because the box was funny. This was useful in the grocery aisle, where parents sometimes demanded reasons and children were prepared to supply whichever reason seemed most likely to move the carton into the cart. Not every family bought it, and distribution and household tastes varied. Some viewers remember Zonkers as a regular television snack. Others recall seeing the black box but choosing a different glazed popcorn, while many younger children encountered it only later. Unlike pizza spins, Screaming Yellow Zonkers did not vanish during the 1970s. The brand continued for decades before regular production ended much later, followed by occasional limited returns. What faded first was the particular power of that original shelf appearance, when a nearly black carton surrounded by ordinary snack packaging could make a child stop the grocery cart with one urgent request. The memory is therefore divided between taste and design, sweet yellow popcorn in the bowl, strange words on the table, and a package that remained interesting even after its contents were gone. But the next popcorn snack did not arrive ready to eat. It began as a flat foil pan on the stove, and children watched it rise into a silver dome while an adult shook the handle and hoped the bottom had not already burned. The flat foil pan looked unimpressive before it reached the stove. Beneath its paper cover, Jiffy Pop held popcorn kernels, oil, and seasoning inside a shallow disposable pan with a wire handle folded against the side. Then the burner came on, an adult began moving the pan back and forth, and the package transformed into entertainment. At first, there was only the soft scrape of aluminum above the heat. A few seconds later came one sharp pop, then another, followed by a rapid storm of kernels striking the foil. The center began to rise. A silver mound pushed upward as though the pan were inflating itself, growing from a flat package into a shining dome, large enough to make children gather near the stove. Ordinary popcorn prepared in a saucepan remained hidden beneath the lid. Jiffy Pop performed in public. The family could watch the snack being created, which made waiting feel less like waiting and more like the opening act. The handle required constant motion. If the pan paused too long, the kernels closest to the burner could scorch while those above remained stubbornly unpopped. Parents shook it in short, steady movements, listening for the popping to accelerate and then slow. Children offered advice from a safe distance, usually with the confidence of people who were not holding a hot metal pan. Shake it faster. Move it to the other side. It is getting too big. Is it done yet? The expanding foil seemed capable of rising forever, though it eventually stopped with a final scattering of pops. Then came another delicate operation. The pan had to be removed from the heat, allowed to settle briefly, and opened without releasing a cloud of steam directly toward an impatient face. The foil was torn carefully near the top, creating an opening through which the smell of warm popcorn and butter-flavored seasoning rushed into the kitchen. The snack was ready, and the pan had supplied both the cooking vessel and the serving bowl. Jiffy Pop had been marketed since the end of the 1950s, but it remained perfectly suited to the 1970s household appetite for convenience that still felt like an activity. It did not remove the stove, the heat, or the person responsible for preventing disaster. Instead, it gathered the ingredients into one package and added a visual reward. That made it useful during family television nights, sleepovers, camping trips, and weekends when children wanted something more interesting than opening a bag. The expanding dome gave the snack a touch of kitchen magic, although the magic depended on timing. A successful pan produced fluffy popcorn with only a few hard kernels beneath it. An unsuccessful one produced a dark smell that reached the hallway before anyone admitted what had happened. The paper instructions were simple. The burner had opinions of its own. Children often wanted to eat directly from the opened pan, but several hands reaching through torn foil created sharp edges, spilled kernels and arguments about who had found the most heavily seasoned section. Pouring the popcorn into a large bowl restored some order. It also revealed the results. Pale kernels tumbled out first, followed by smaller pieces, unpopped seeds, and whatever darkened evidence had been hiding near the bottom. The foil dome collapsed as it emptied, returning to something closer to its original shape after providing several minutes of drama. Unlike packaged popcorn, Jiffy Pop filled the room with heat movement and smell. The sound of the pan being shaken became part of the memory, along with the adult wrist doing the work and the children watching from the edge of the kitchen. The product promised fun to make as well as fun to eat, but the labor was not distributed equally. Children handled the watching with exceptional dedication. Goldfish crackers required none of that preparation. They arrived already baked, already shaped, and ready to pour into a bowl beside homework or carry in a small bag during errands. Pepperidge Farm had introduced the fish-shaped crackers to American shoppers in the early 1960s, so by the 1970s they were familiar residents of many snack shelves. Each cracker was small enough for a child's hand and recognizable even when viewed from the bottom of a lunchbox. The fish shape did most of the advertising after the package was opened. A plain square cracker could be eaten without inspection. A goldfish cracker invited a brief pause. Children lined them up, counted them, made them swim across the table, or selected one to represent a teacher sibling or imaginary sea creature before eating the entire cast. The familiar smiling face associated with later goldfish had not yet been stamped onto the crackers. In the 1970s, the outline alone carried the idea. Their size made them useful for the moments between meals. A parent could pour a modest handful onto a napkin without committing the household to a full bag of chips. Goldfish fit into lunchboxes, small plastic containers, picnic bags and bowls placed on the kitchen table while supper was still being prepared. The cheese flavour was mild enough for children who avoided stronger seasonings, and the baked crackers left less dramatic evidence than Cheetos. There might be crumbs on the shirt or salt on the fingers, but no bright orange trail leading from pantry to sofa. They also encouraged counting, though the purpose of the count changed according to age. A younger child might arrange 10 fish in a row. An older child counted only to confirm that a sibling had received more. Small crackers made fairness visible, and once visible it became a matter requiring immediate adult review. The package could last through several snack times if portions were poured into bowls. Left within reach, it could disappear through the steady action of one small hand returning again and again. Goldfish did not demand the concentration of a marathon bar or create the excitement of Pop Rocks. Their strength was quieter. They were familiar, portable, and shaped just strangely enough to turn ordinary crackers into companions for an afternoon. Some families remember cheese varieties most clearly, while others knew plainer or differently seasoned versions depending on what local stores carried and what parents preferred. They might appear at a birthday party beside pretzels in the back seat during a road trip, or on a kitchen table next to a glass of powdered drink mix. They were not usually treated as a grand reward. They were the snack that could be given without interrupting the day. Together, Jiffy Pop and Goldfish represented two opposite forms of childhood pleasure. One began flat and demanded heat motion, adult attention, and a small amount of suspense before anyone received a bite. The other needed only an open package and a hand large enough to carry several fish. One filled the kitchen with popping and a growing foil dome. The other supplied a quiet crunch beside schoolbooks and television. Yet both became memorable because of shape. Children remembered the silver balloon rising above the stove and the tiny crackers swimming across a tabletop, long after the exact flavour had softened in memory. On the next pantry shelf, another familiar shape waited 2 peanut-shaped cookies pressed around a layer of peanut butter, filling ready to produce enough crumbs that a glass of milk felt less like a suggestion than necessary equipment. The peanut shape appeared before the peanut butter did. A Nutter Butter cookie looked like 2 small peanut shells pressed together, complete with a textured surface and a narrow middle that made the cookie easy to hold between finger and thumb. Inside was a layer of peanut butter filling firm enough to keep the sandwich together, but soft enough to cling to whichever half won when the cookie was pulled apart. The design made the contents immediately understandable. A child did not need to read the package or study an ingredient list. This object looked like a peanut, smelled like peanut butter, and promised that the flavour would follow through. In a 1970s pantry crowded with square crackers, round cookies, cereal boxes and bags folded shut with clothespins, the moulded peanut stood apart. It looked playful without requiring a cartoon character, and familiar without pretending to be homemade. The only uncertainty was whether it would be eaten whole, twisted apart or dipped into milk until structural failure became unavoidable. Nutter Butter sandwich cookies had been introduced in the United States in 1969, placing them at the beginning of the decade's snack memories. By the 1970s, they fit easily into the growing household habit of keeping packaged cookies ready for lunchboxes, after-school hunger weekend errands, and unexpected children arriving through the back door. The cookie was sturdy enough to travel in a paper lunch bag, and recognizable enough to create interest when the package appeared on a kitchen counter. Yet it was not an especially quiet food. The first bite produced a dry, firm crunch followed by a dense peanut butter sweetness that seemed to absorb every available drop of moisture in the mouth. One cookie could be eaten alone. 2 made a beverage increasingly advisable. A glass of cold milk did not merely accompany the snack, it restored working conditions. Children developed methods for dealing with the sandwich structure. Some bit straight through both cookies and the filling, accepting the crumbs that immediately fell onto the table. Others separated the halves and studied the results. The peanut butter layer rarely divided with perfect fairness. Most of it remained attached to one cookie, leaving the other with only a thin tan outline and the disappointing appearance of a job half completed. The plain half might be eaten first, so the filled side could be saved as the better final bite. It could also be pressed back together after inspection, though the sandwich never looked quite as orderly once a child had reopened the factory's work. A more ambitious eater scraped the filling away with the front teeth before finishing the cookies separately. This required concentration and produced an expression that concerned adults unfamiliar with the procedure. Milk changed the texture completely. A quick dip softened the ridges while leaving the center firm. A longer dip allowed the cookie to absorb enough liquid to become tender-heavy and dangerously close to breaking. The ideal timing varied from child to child and was learned through repeated experiments conducted above the glass. Lift too soon, and very little had changed. Wait too long, and half the cookie separated without warning, sinking to the bottom where it joined earlier casualties in a pale crumb-filled layer. Recovering those pieces required a spoon, a patient tilt of the glass, or the decision that peanut butter sediment could remain until the milk was gone. Parents watching the process sometimes suggested taking smaller bites. Children understood that smaller bites reduced the risk, but they also reduced the excitement. The collapsing cookie was not always an accident. Sometimes it was the experiment. At the kitchen table, the package could support several kinds of family arithmetic. 2 cookies might be declared a serving. 3 could be defended if one was broken. A cracked cookie discovered inside the package occupied an uncertain legal category and was often eaten immediately to prevent further damage. In homes with several children, the bag or tray never seemed as full after opening as it had appeared through the package. Someone counted the remaining cookies. Someone else explained that counting snacks showed a lack of trust. A parent might pour several onto a plate and put the package away, preventing an open-ended visit from small hands. This worked better than leaving the entire supply beside the milk carton, where conversation and repetition could empty it without anyone remembering the exact number consumed. Packaged cookies saved preparation time. They did not eliminate supervision. Peanut butter already held a familiar place in American childhood through sandwiches, crackers, toast, and spoonfuls taken directly from the jar when permission was flexible. Nutter butter moved that flavor into a molded sandwich cookie that could be stored longer and served without spreading anything. No knife was left in the sink. No bread tore beneath thick peanut butter. No child complained that one sandwich corner had received less filling than another. The factory had measured and enclosed the portion in advance. For parents, that made the cookie practical. For children, it made it dependable. The flavor was sweet enough to feel like dessert, but familiar enough to belong beside milk after school. Some households bought it regularly, while others preferred store brands, homemade cookies, or snacks without peanuts. Family rules and allergy awareness differed, and many school environments would later become much more cautious about peanut products. In the 1970s lunchbox, however, peanut butter remained a common and powerful presence for many children. The strongest memory may be the dryness itself, the first crunchy bite, the filling coating the roof of the mouth, and the immediate reach for a cold glass. There was something satisfying about a snack that arrived with its own obvious solution. The cookie created the thirst. The milk completed the ritual. Crumbs collected around the base of the glass, the textured peanut shapes disappeared one by one, and the final swallow carried away the last traces of filling. Nutter butter did not vanish from American stores, but its place in memory belongs especially to those ordinary 1970s afternoons when a child sat at the table, school papers unopened, and negotiated how many cookies could reasonably be eaten before supper. The next snack required no milk and barely required chewing. It came from a pressurized can landed on a cracker in a soft ribbon and gave children temporary authority over the architecture of cheese. The can stood upright beside a plate of crackers wearing a plastic cap and a narrow nozzle that gave children a power normally reserved for cake decorators and people trusted with the whipped cream. In the 1970s, the product was known as Snackmate, a Nabisco cheese spread that could be pressed directly from its container without a knife jar or cutting board. A finger pushed the nozzle sideways and a soft ribbon of orange cheese curled onto the cracker below. At least, that was the intended result. The first attempt often produced a short, uncertain blob. The second created a line that continued past the cracker's edge. By the third, a child had usually decided that snack preparation was an art form and that every saltine deserved a different design. The cheese could be arranged into circles, zigzags, initials, faces, or towers whose height exceeded the cracker's structural limits. What had once been a simple afternoon snack became an edible craft project, supervised from across the kitchen by an adult who'd already noticed how quickly the can was becoming lighter. Snackmate had been introduced before the decade began, but it fit comfortably into the 1970s enthusiasm for foods that arrived ready to serve and slightly more entertaining than necessary. The can required no refrigeration before opening, and the cheese emerged already soft enough to spread. A parent could place crackers on a plate, remove the cap, and allow children to assemble their own snack while dinner waited in another part of the kitchen. No cheese had to be sliced. No block had to be returned to its wrapper. No knife remained on the counter coated with a layer that would harden before anyone remembered it. The package turned convenience into participation. Children did not merely receive cheese and crackers, they operated the equipment. The fact that the equipment had only one control made mastery immediate, though moderation remained more difficult. A cracker needed enough cheese to taste. A child controlling the nozzle often believed it needed enough cheese to be visible from the hallway. The nozzle demanded a particular combination of pressure and movement. Push too gently and nothing happened. Push harder, and the cheese arrived suddenly folding over itself in a thick ribbon. The best results came from moving the can while pressing, allowing the spread to form a neat spiral from the outside edge toward the center. Advertisements could produce delicate loops and tidy peaks. Children produced orange road systems, leaning towers, and shapes that required explanation. The cracker beneath all this ambition was usually a saltine, a buttery round cracker, or whatever sturdy variety happened to be open in the cabinet. Thin crackers sometimes broke before the cheese was finished. When that happened, the decorated half was eaten immediately, and the accident was presented as a practical necessity rather than a reason to stop. Broken crackers did not return to the box. They entered a special category of snack that had to be consumed before further damage occurred. The texture was unlike a slice cut from a block of cheddar. Snackmate was smooth processed and soft enough to hold the ridges created by the nozzle. It sat on top of the cracker rather than soaking into it, creating a contrast between the creamy spread and the dry crunch beneath. Children could eat the finished cracker in one bite or nibble around the edges until the cheese-heavy center remained. Some placed a second cracker on top, making a sandwich thick enough to squeeze the filling out on both sides. Others skipped the cracker entirely and attempted to place a small amount directly onto a fingertip. This method removed the inconvenience of construction, but also removed any reasonable explanation for why the can had been handed over. Parents understood that the nozzle had been designed to decorate food. Children understood that fingers were technically available surfaces. Household rules developed accordingly. Because the can seemed to contain an invisible supply, children had little sense of how much remained. A cookie package became visibly empty. A cheese can continued looking almost unchanged, until the pressure produced a thinner ribbon, an uneven sputter, or nothing at all. This made sharing difficult to measure. One child might decorate 4 crackers modestly. Another created one enormous orange monument and used the same quantity. The person holding the can controlled both portion and design, which meant turns had to be watched carefully. Younger siblings pressed too slowly. Older siblings knew how to form a continuous line, and sometimes used that skill for territorial advantage. A parent who wanted the can to last could prepare the crackers, personally producing sensible portions in several quick motions. But doing so removed the feature children liked most. Snackmate was not requested simply because it tasted like cheese. It was requested because the child got to make something with it. The product also belonged to the decade's casual party table. A can could decorate crackers, celery pieces, or small appetizers without requiring the host to mix a separate spread. Varieties and serving ideas encouraged adults to treat the nozzle as a shortcut to decorative food, especially when company was coming, and the living room had already been vacuumed. Children inherited the less formal version after school. The same package that could produce tidy party swirls on a serving tray could create a crooked smile on a cracker beside a glass of powdered drink mix. That movement between adult entertaining and children snacking helped make the can memorable. It promised that ordinary ingredients could look prepared even when the preparation consisted of pressing one plastic lever. The result was not homemade cheese spread, and no one needed to pretend otherwise. Its appeal came from consistency, storage convenience, and the unusual pleasure of watching food arrive through a nozzle. Snackmate did not truly vanish. The product was later renamed Easy Cheese, allowing newer generations to continue drawing orange spirals on crackers under a different label. What changed was the particular household surprise of encountering cheese in a pressurized can when the idea still felt novel. For many 1970s children, the can represented permission to play with food in a controlled and officially packaged manner. The cracker became a canvas, the nozzle became a tool, and the snack lasted until an adult noticed that artistic freedom had consumed half the container. The memory remains in the soft hiss of the can, the ridged ribbon holding its shape, and the cracker snapping beneath more cheese than any engineer would have recommended. Yet the next snack moved in the opposite direction. Instead of promising instant party decoration, it arrived in a crinkly wrapper with oats honey and an outdoor image offering children a bar that sounded sensible, travelled well and produced enough crumbs to mark an entire trail from the pantry to the backyard. The wrapper sounded more practical than exciting. It did not contain chocolate coating, cream filling, popping crystals, or cheese that could be drawn onto a cracker. Inside was a firm rectangle of toasted oats, held together with sweetness, the sort of snack that seemed to have arrived from a hiking trail even when it was opened beneath the kitchen light. Nature Valley granola bars entered American stores during the middle of the 1970s, with the familiar combination of rolled oats and honey helping introduce many families to a new kind of packaged snack. The bar looked simple and slightly serious. Its rough surface revealed individual oat pieces, and its golden brown colour suggested something baked rather than manufactured for maximum playground excitement. Parents saw portability in ingredients they recognized. Children saw a wrapped bar that might be acceptable before dinner. Both sides had found something useful, which was unusual enough to deserve attention. Opening the package produced the first complication. The bar was crisp and crisp. Granola did not believe in remaining entirely inside the wrapper. A careful child could split it along a natural break and lift out one section at a time. An impatient child could tear the wrapper open, pull quickly and release a shower of crumbs across the table carpet car seat or front of a clean school shirt. The first bite broke with a hard crunch. Small oat fragments separated immediately and travelled in several directions, some toward the mouth, and others toward locations that would be discovered later by a parent, an aunt, or the family vacuum cleaner. The texture demanded chewing, unlike soft snack cakes that compressed and disappeared in a few bites. A granola bar felt substantial because it made the eater work. It also announced that work to everyone nearby. Quiet reading and crunchy granola were activities that could occupy the same room but not without negotiation. The flavour was mild compared with candy or heavily seasoned chips. Honey provided sweetness, while toasted oats gave the bar a warm cereal-like taste. Children already knew oats from breakfast bowls and oatmeal cookies, but the granola bar changed their shape and purpose. Breakfast had been compressed into something that could fit inside a pocket, though most pockets were not improved by the resulting crumbs. The bar needed no bowl, no milk, and no spoon. It could travel in a lunchbox, wait in the glove compartment, or be handed to a child before a long grocery trip. A parent could carry several without worrying about frosting melting or crackers being reduced to powder. The wrapper suggested order. The moment it opened, order became more theoretical. Still, the bar's sturdiness made it useful in places where softer snacks struggled, including backpacks, family cars, picnic baskets, and the bottom of a bag packed for an afternoon outside. Nature Valley's name and imagery connected the product with open spaces, trails, trees, and an active life beyond the kitchen. This suited a decade in which many shoppers were becoming more interested in foods presented as natural, wholesome, or less dependent on the bright, artificial excitement associated with candy. The granola bar offered the idea of outdoor independence in a form manufactured for the supermarket shelf. A child could eat one after climbing a hill, riding a bicycle, or walking through a campground. The same child could also eat one while sitting 6 feet from the television, with no intention of going outdoors. The product did not inspect the circumstances. Its mountain and valley personality travelled wherever the wrapper went, bringing a suggestion of fresh air into panelled family rooms, school cafeterias and station wagons whose windows had not been opened since the highway began. For parents, the bar occupied a valuable position between treat and responsibility. It was sweet enough to satisfy many children, but sensible-looking enough to pack without feeling that lunch had been completed by the candy aisle. It could replace cookies on a school day, quiet a request during errands, or provide something immediate when a child arrived home hungry while supper was still an hour away. The portions were already measured, and the product could remain on the pantry shelf until needed. Yet children did not always accept the adult interpretation. Some loved the crunch and honey flavour. Others viewed the bar as the snack purchased by a parent who had walked past the chocolate cakes without losing focus. In a lunchbox trade, granola had value, but its exchange rate depended heavily on the other children present. A friend who liked it might offer crackers or fruit. A friend holding a cream-filled cake generally believed negotiation should begin from a position of greater strength. The bar also reflected the changing rhythm of family eating. Snacks were becoming increasingly portable, individually packaged and detached from the kitchen table. Children had school activities, sports, bicycle trips, errands, and afternoons spent moving between friends' houses. Adults needed foods that could be stored, carried, and distributed without preparation. The granola bar answered those needs while preserving an image of simplicity. Someone still had to buy the box, place it in the pantry monitor how quickly it disappeared, and brush the crumbs from the back seat. Convenience reduced certain forms of work but never eliminated cleanup. A child could eat the entire bar outdoors and somehow return home carrying crumbs in both shoes. This was one of the product's less advertised connections with nature. Unlike many vanished snacks on this list, Nature Valley granola bars did not disappear. They became part of a much larger snack bar category, joined by softer bars, coated bars, fruit-filled bars, breakfast bars and varieties designed for nearly every imaginable appetite. What changed was the novelty. In the 1970s, a crunchy bar of oats and honey, packaged for individual travel, felt like a new bridge between cereal cookies and outdoor food. Later generations would see shelves filled with similar choices. For the children who first encountered it, however, the memory remained specific. The wrapper opening the sharp break of the bar, the toasted sweetness, and the small field of crumbs left behind wherever the outdoors had supposedly begun. The next summer, snacks required even less chewing. Long plastic tubes waited in the freezer beside trays of ice, while cardboard push-ups promised a cold reward that rose slowly from its container and melted faster than any child could manage. The long plastic tubes looked almost unfinished when they came home from the grocery store. Inside was brightly coloured liquid, still soft enough to bend with the package, and the real preparation happened only after a parent placed the bundle in the freezer. Several hours later, the tubes had become solid otter pops stacked beside metal ice trays, frozen vegetables in a cardboard box collecting frost around its corners. Children checked them too early, squeezing the plastic to see whether the centre had hardened, then returned 10 minutes later, as though freezing might respond to persistence. When the pops were finally ready, another household requirement appeared. Someone had to find the scissors. Teeth could sometimes tear the top, but the result was uneven, difficult, and likely to produce a small burst of syrup across the kitchen. One clean snip opened the tube and summer began with a strip of plastic held between both hands. Otter Pops reached American families at the beginning of the 1970s, offering a frozen treat that stores could sell at room temperature and households could freeze whenever space became available. That arrangement made them convenient for supermarkets and useful for parents. A package could wait in the pantry until hot weather, a birthday gathering, or the week when several neighborhood children seemed to be living near the back door. Once frozen, the colorful tubes occupied surprisingly little room compared with boxes of ice cream and bulky cartons of novelties. They could be tucked along the side of the freezer stacked beneath an ice tray, or squeezed into the narrow space beside a package of hamburger buns. The freezer did the final work. No molds had to be filled, no wooden sticks inserted, and no pitcher of drink mix carefully poured, while children argued over which color should be made first. Choosing a pop involved flavor color and character loyalty, although the frozen tubes themselves often made the decision more physical than thoughtful. Children searched the pile for red, blue, purple, green, or orange, moving aside every unwanted color, and leaving the freezer door open long enough for an adult to call from another room. In families with several children, favorites disappeared first. The remaining supply became a collection of flavors everyone claimed to like less, though those objections weakened quickly on a hot afternoon. Fairness could be established by taking turns closing one's eyes, or allowing the child who found the scissors to choose first. None of these systems survived without debate. A tube of frozen colored ice cost little compared with many individually packaged treats, but ownership became intensely personal once a child had selected a flavor and held it against the light. Eating the pop required pushing the frozen section upward from the bottom, while drawing syrup and melting ice from the open end. At first, the treat was firm and painfully cold against the lips. Then the edges softened and a small amount of intensely flavored liquid gathered at the top. The plastic tube became wet with condensation. Fingers slipped. A child squeezed too hard and sent the ice upward farther than expected, or failed to squeeze at all and spent several minutes trying to reach a shrinking frozen column at the bottom. The last portion was usually the sweetest and messiest, a mixture of melted syrup and small pieces of ice that had to be lifted toward the mouth with both hands. By then the coloured liquid had stained the tongue, chilled the fingertips, and dripped toward the elbow. The package kept most of the mess contained, but Summer always found a way out. Otter Pops belonged outdoors whenever possible. Children carried them to concrete steps, bicycles lying in the grass backyard, sprinklers and aluminum lawn chairs warming in the sun. The empty plastic sleeve could be folded, twisted, or temporarily worn over one finger before an adult instructed someone to put it in the trash. Because the pops were inexpensive and easy to store, they could be distributed to several children without turning an ordinary afternoon into a formal dessert occasion. They appeared after yard work, during neighbourhood play, and when the kitchen felt too warm for baking. The treat was mostly cold sweetness and colour, yet the memory surrounding it was larger. The freezer door opening scissors closing through plastic bare feet on the back steps, and the race to finish before the final section became liquid. The cardboard push-up offered a slower and creamier kind of summer engineering. Instead of a plastic tube filled with frozen ice, the treat came in a short paper cylinder with a round platform inside and a stick projecting from the bottom. The child pushed upward, raising a small section of ice cream or sherbet above the rim. Many remember bright orange or fruit-flavoured versions, though brands and flavours varied from one ice cream truck store freezer and region to another. The mechanism was simple, but using it well required judgment. Push too little, and the mouth had to reach awkwardly into the tube. Push too far, and the entire frozen column leaned above the cardboard, with no support threatening to slide onto a shirt, a sidewalk, or the seat of the family car. The paper rim softened as the treat melted. Children turned the tube, licking around the exposed surface while trying to keep every side level. The bottom stick became sticky beneath the fingers, and drops travelled down through the cardboard with impressive determination. Unlike a conventional ice cream bar, there was no wooden handle separating the hand from the dessert. The container was part wrapper, part serving dish, and part mechanical lift. A child could control how much appeared at once, which created the pleasant illusion of making the treat last. In practice, the sun controlled the schedule. The top softened faster than the bottom could be pushed, and hesitation resulted in a ring of sherbet around the rim. Adults advised small pushes. Children preferred dramatic progress. The cardboard tube recorded every decision. Whether selected from a neighbourhood ice cream truck, a grocery freezer, or a box kept at home, the push-up felt interactive in a way ordinary frozen bars did not. The treat rose because the child made it rise. It could be paused, lowered slightly, or advanced for the next bite. That small mechanism made the package as memorable as the flavour. Otter Pops asked children to squeeze sweetness from a narrow plastic sleeve. Push-ups asked them to operate a tiny frozen elevator. Both turned inexpensive summer treats into activities performed on back steps, sidewalks, porches, and station wagon seats. Both also disappeared quickly enough to leave only sticky fingers and an empty container. Yet the next snack carried a very different kind of memory. It was not merely shaped for children. It copied an adult habit so directly that miniature packages of chalky white candy once allowed playgrounds to imitate the cigarette smoke seen almost everywhere around them. The little box fit into a child's palm with uncomfortable accuracy. Its proportions, flip-top appearance, printed brand design, and neat row of white sticks imitated an adult cigarette package closely enough that no explanation was necessary. Open the top slide, one candy-free place it between two fingers, and the performance began before the first taste. Many candy cigarettes were hard, chalky sugar sticks, sometimes marked with a coloured tip, to suggest the glowing end of a real cigarette. Other versions used chocolate or bubble gum, but the purpose of the shape remained obvious. The candy itself could be mildly sweet, powdery, and quick to dissolve, yet flavour was only part of the attraction. A peppermint stick would have tasted similar. A cigarette-shaped stick allowed a child to copy a gesture seen at kitchen tables, in family cars outside stores, and in countless adult conversations where smoke rose almost unnoticed toward the ceiling. Children did not usually approach the package as a serious statement about tobacco. They treated it as costume and play. One child leaned against a fence and pretended to be a detective. Another held the candy between two fingers, while copying the deep voice of an uncle-neighbor movie character or television cowboy. Friends offered one another sticks from the box with exaggerated politeness, imitating the social ritual adults performed when they passed around real cigarettes. The candy could be tapped against the package balanced at the corner of the mouth, or held while delivering a sentence intended to sound older than the speaker. Some gum versions were wrapped in paper, and certain styles allowed a child to blow out a small puff of powder before chewing, producing a brief imitation of smoke. The effect lasted only a second. That was enough. The package had turned a few cents worth of sugar into a complete adult performance. The imitation made sense inside the visual world of the 1970s, even as public understanding of smoking's dangers was changing. Cigarettes were still visible in many homes, restaurants, offices, waiting rooms, cars, and social gatherings. An ashtray might sit on the coffee table beside the snack bowl. A parent opened a car window slightly while smoking on a family drive. Adults lit cigarettes after dinner during card games or while speaking on the telephone in the kitchen. Children saw the gestures before they understood the consequences. Television cigarette advertising ended in the United States at the beginning of 1971, but the adult habit did not disappear from daily life or popular culture. Candy manufacturers did not need to teach children what the small white sticks represented. The surrounding world had already supplied the demonstration. At the corner store, candy cigarettes offered an unusual amount of theatre for a small purchase. The boxes stood near gum wax bottles, jawbreakers, and rolls of pressed candy, often at the exact height where children could study them while counting coins. Packages sometimes used fictional names and designs that closely echoed real cigarette brands without copying them exactly. This made the product feel more authentic and slightly mysterious. A child could choose a box, tuck it into a shirt pocket, and distribute the sticks to friends outside. The candies were thin enough to share without ending the supply immediately, though generosity depended on how many children had noticed the purchase. One stick might be eaten normally. Another had to be saved for pretending. A broken one lost some of its dramatic value but remained perfectly acceptable as candy, proving that imagination had standards even when sugar did not. At home, adult reactions varied. Some parents remembered eating candy cigarettes themselves and saw them as harmless make-believe. Others disliked the imitation, especially as warnings about tobacco became harder to ignore. The conflict could occur at the grocery shelf where a child saw only candy and a parent saw a habit no longer worth presenting as glamorous. This was not the usual disagreement over too much sugar before supper. The shape carried meaning beyond the ingredients. Around candy, a bottle-shaped candy and a cigarette-shaped candy might all be made mostly of sugar, but only one rehearsed an adult behavior connected to illness and addiction. By the 1970s, that contradiction was becoming increasingly visible. The candy belonged to an older tradition of children copying adult life, while the adult habit itself was entering a period of stronger warnings, restrictions, and public debate. The candy also reveals how completely children's products once borrowed adult symbols, without much concern for where the imitation might lead. Toy kitchens copied domestic work. Toy tools copied garages and workshops. Candy cigarettes copied a social habit that had been presented for decades as mature, relaxed, stylish, and ordinary. The difference became clearer as health concerns grew. There was no need to exaggerate the effect of one box or claim that every child who played with a candy later smoked. Families, researchers, and public officials could still question why a confection needed to look so precisely like a tobacco product. Attempts to prohibit candy cigarettes nationally did not succeed, but criticism helped change how they were presented. Over time, the word cigarette largely disappeared from many packages, red tips became less common, and similar sweets were more often sold simply as candy sticks. For the children who remember them, the image can produce two feelings at once. There is the clear memory of a tiny box opened on a sidewalk, chalky sweetness dissolving on the tongue, and friends laughing as they pretended to be older. Then there is the adult recognition of what the game was copying. Nostalgia does not require pretending the product was wise. It only requires remembering honestly why it made sense in that particular household world, where cigarettes were visible enough that even candy could borrow their shape. The sticks did not vanish completely, but their presentation changed as the culture around them changed. What once looked like ordinary imitation gradually began to look strange. On the next candy shelf, the container copied something much less serious. A row of tiny bottles made from chewable wax, each one holding a single swallow of brightly flavoured liquid. The tiny bottles stood in a row like refreshments prepared for dolls. Each one was moulded from soft wax narrow at the neck, wider through the body, and filled with a small amount of brightly coloured fruit-flavoured syrup. Nickel-nip bottles might appear red, orange, yellow, green or blue beneath the clear wrapping, their colours often more persuasive than any written flavour description. A child could hold the entire package in one hand, study the assortment, and begin deciding which bottle deserved to go first. The candy required a sequence. Bite through the wax at the top, remove the little cap tip the bottle toward the mouth, and drink the sweet liquid inside. The portion was remarkably small, barely more than a swallow, yet the container made it feel like a complete beverage. It had a bottle shape, a bottle opening and something to drink. The fact that the bottle itself could be chewed afterward made the whole arrangement seem almost impossibly efficient. Opening the first bottle demanded more judgment than strength. Bite too low and syrup might escape before the candy reached the mouth. Bite too gently and the wax neck flattened without opening. Most children learn to nip off the narrow top with the front teeth, creating a small hole through which the liquid could be squeezed or poured. The first taste arrived quickly and intensely, a concentrated burst of sweetness that was often difficult to connect with one precise fruit. Red might suggest cherry, green might suggest lime. Blue suggested whatever blue had come to mean in the world of children's candy. The flavour lasted only a moment because there was so little liquid inside. A child who had waited through the entire opening procedure could drain the bottle in one swallow and immediately wonder whether some syrup remained trapped in the corners. The wax was squeezed, flattened, and rolled upward between the fingers until the final drop had been persuaded to leave. Then came the question that followed nearly every package of wax bottles: what should be done with the bottle itself? The wax was designed to be chewed, and many children treated it like a temporary piece of gum. Once emptied, the bottle could be folded between the teeth, compressed into a soft lump, and worked until the faint sweetness disappeared. Its texture was smooth, resistant, and noticeably different from ordinary chewing gum. It did not become especially flavourful with effort. It simply continued being wax. Some children chewed it for several minutes out of determination curiosity, or the belief that throwing away an edible container showed poor judgment. Others took a few bites and quietly discarded it after deciding the syrup had been the entire point. Both groups understood the same basic truth. The liquid was the reward. The wax was the packaging that had negotiated permission to remain in the mouth. The different colours created a natural system of trade and comparison. A child might drink one bottle, slowly announce the flavour, and offer another colour to a friend in exchange for something from a separate candy bag. In a group, everyone wanted to know whether the red syrup tasted better than the orange or whether the green was too sharp. The bottles were small enough to share, but the package rarely contained enough of any one colour to satisfy every preference. One child claimed the blue bottle immediately. Another argued that the red had already been promised. A younger sibling received yellow only after being assured that yellow was definitely the best. Because each bottle provided such a brief taste, children discussed them longer than they actually consumed them. The candy's size created scarcity, one swallow at a time. Nickel nips belonged naturally in the corner store world of penny candy, even when inflation and changing prices made the old phrase less literal. They could sit near wax lips, gum candy necklaces, jawbreakers, and other novelties that offered a shape or activity in addition to sweetness. The name itself recalled an earlier era when a small candy purchase could be described through coins and tiny portions. By the 1970s, the wax bottles were already an old-fashioned idea, surviving among newer products with louder television campaigns and more elaborate wrappers. They did not need a cartoon mascot or a connection to outer space. Their appeal could be understood simply by looking at them. Children recognized miniature bottles and immediately wanted to discover what was inside. The package explained the game before anyone opened it. At home, the wax bottles produced a different sort of evidence from chocolate cakes or cheese-flavoured snacks. There were no crumbs and very little powder, but flattened wax shapes appeared on plates, napkins, car seats, and occasionally the edge of a coffee table. A parent who had supplied the candy might later discover a small colourless lump and wonder why an empty bottle had been chewed into something resembling a button. The syrup could also create trouble if a bottle was squeezed before the opening reached the mouth. A bright drop landed on a shirt, a backseat cushion, or a page of homework and immediately became far more visible than the amount of liquid inside the bottle had seemed capable of producing. The candy was tiny. Its stains showed greater ambition. For some children, wax bottles appeared during Halloween rather than ordinary grocery trips. Their unusual shape made them stand out among wrapped hard candies, gum and chocolate bars emptied onto the living room carpet for inspection. A small package could be sorted by colour, saved for later, or opened immediately because no one wanted to risk trading away the best flavour. Other children encountered them at 5 and dime stores, concession counters, amusement parks, or neighbourhood shops where loose and novelty candies occupied a glass case near the register. Regional availability and family habits varied, so the bottles were never universal. Yet those who knew them often remember the exact physical routine, the wax giving way beneath the teeth, the syrup reaching the tongue and the empty bottle collapsing into a warm, chewy shape. Nickel-nip bottles did not truly disappear. Versions of the candy are still sold, carrying forward the same basic instruction to bite, drink, and chew. What faded was the setting in which such a peculiar object could feel completely ordinary. A small neighbourhood store, several coins in a child's hand, and a candy display filled with products that required participation before flavour. The bottles were inefficient by modern standards. Most of the object was container, and the reward inside lasted only seconds. That imbalance was exactly what made them memorable. A piece of candy could be consumed and forgotten. A wax bottle had to be opened, emptied, chewed, judged, and discussed. On the next shelf, another candy borrowed its shape from the adult world of soda. Small pressed pieces looked like metal bottle caps and promised cola root beer, and other familiar drinks without holding a single drop of liquid. The candies looked like something swept from the floor behind a neighborhood soda cooler. Each bottle cap was a small pressed tablet with a ridged edge and a round face shape to suggest the crimped metal caps that had to be pried from glass soda bottles. The resemblance was close enough to explain the product before the package was opened. Inside waited an assortment of pale colours representing familiar fountain and bottled drink flavours, cola root beer, grape orange and, in the earlier mix, lemon lime. They were not hard candies meant to last through an entire bicycle ride, nor were they soft enough to chew comfortably. They had a dry, compressed texture that broke beneath the teeth and dissolved into a sweet, slightly tart powder. A child could carry the taste of several sodas in one small roll or box without finding a bottle opener paying a deposit, or being told that one soft drink before supper was already enough. Bottle caps appeared in 1972, arriving at a moment when soda was already woven into childhood treats, family outings, restaurant meals and corner store purchases. Many children knew the cold weight of a glass bottle, the hiss released when its cap came off, and the metal disc left behind on a counter or caught in the opener of a vending machine. Some collected those real caps, studied the printed logos, or flattened them beneath a shoe. The candy borrowed that familiar object and made it edible. A child did not need to understand packaging nostalgia to appreciate the transformation. Adults removed bottle caps and threw them away. Children opened a candy package and found the discarded part had become the reward. The shape also gave the product a practical advantage in the crowded novelty candy display. Fruit tablets could look ordinary. Soda-flavoured tablets shaped like bottle caps arrived with their own explanation and their own small joke. The flavour assortment encouraged sorting before eating. Cola pieces might be separated into one pile, root beer into another, and grape protected from anyone known to prefer grape more than friendship required. A child poured the package into one palm, examined the colours, and began the serious work of identifying which flavour was which. Under dim kitchen light, two shades could look suspiciously similar. The first bite then became a test. Root beer often carried the most recognizable personality, a creamy, spicy sweetness that seemed surprisingly convincing for something with no liquid in it. Cola tasted like the idea of soda after the bubbles had been removed, and the flavour pressed into a tablet. Orange and grape entered more familiar candy territory, while lemon lime offered a sharper edge. Children compared results, corrected one another, and occasionally insisted that a piece had been mislabeled by colour, when the more likely explanation was that it had been eaten too quickly. The texture made bottle caps different from the drinks they imitated. A real soda fizzed, cooled the mouth, and disappeared in a series of swallows. The candy began dry and chalky, then softened into powder before dissolving. Some children allowed each piece to melt, slowly extending the flavour and testing whether it would become smoother with patience. Others bit down immediately, producing a sharp crack and several fragments that lodged briefly in the grooves of the teeth. 2 or 3 pieces could be eaten together, although combining root beer, orange and grape created a beverage flavour no respectable soda fountain had ever requested. The candies also left a faint dust in the bottom of the package. Once the full pieces were gone, a determined child tipped that powder directly onto the tongue. Nothing purchased with allowance money was considered finished while visible sugar remained. At the corner store, bottle caps offered useful value because one package contained several pieces and several flavours. The candy could be opened immediately outside, shared with friends, or placed in a pocket. For later, provided the package survived the pressure of coins, keys, and active play. Trading followed flavour preferences. One child offered 2 orange pieces for a root beer. Another accepted grape only as part of a larger agreement. Cola might carry special status because cola-flavoured candy was less common than fruit candy, while lemon-lime divided opinion with unusual efficiency. The bottle cap shapes could also be arranged on a table stacked counted or used as pretend currency until someone remembered they were edible. Like wax bottles, the candy created more activity than its size suggested. The package supported classification, negotiation, imitation, and finally eating, which was a generous workload for a handful of pressed sugar tablets. Bottle caps also appeared naturally in Halloween bags where their package could be distinguished from chocolate bars, gum, and loose hard candy by touch alone. Children emptied the night's collection onto a carpet or kitchen table and sorted everything into private systems of value. Full-size chocolate occupied the highest territory. Unfamiliar wrapped pieces waited for investigation. Bottle caps landed somewhere among the candies worth keeping, especially for children who preferred tart flavours or wanted a break from chocolate. A package could last beyond Halloween night because the pieces did not melt easily and were less tempting to adults searching the candy bowl after children had gone to bed. Yet they were not always protected from siblings. A roll or box that had already been opened invited casual borrowing, and the missing root beer pieces were difficult to explain as an accident. Families could disagree about almost anything, but everyone understood that taking only the best flavour was evidence of intent. The candy reflected a broader 1970s habit of turning familiar drinks, meals, and adult objects into portable snack flavours. Pizza became a wheel. Soda became a pressed cap. The supermarket shelf was learning that children wanted more than sweetness. They wanted recognition, shape procedure, and something to discuss before the first bite. Bottle caps did not disappear after the decade. The brand passed through different owners, the flavour assortment changed, and later pieces did not always reproduce every detail of the earlier cap shape, but the basic idea survived. What faded was the world of returnable glass bottles and metal caps that made the imitation instantly ordinary to a child. Today, the candy may need a little explanation. In the 1970s, the explanation sat inside every soda machine and picnic cooler. The next treat required no bottle at all. It came in a divided packet of flavoured powder with a hard white stick, turning candy into a repeated ritual of licking, dipping, and returning for one more brightly coloured layer. The packet did not offer candy in a form that could simply be unwrapped and eaten. It opened into compartments, each holding a small supply of brightly coloured powder with a hard white candy stick tucked beside them, like a tool issued for a very specific job. In the 1970s, children knew the product as Lick-O-Made Fun Dip or simply Fun Dip, and the name described the procedure accurately. First came the lick, then the dip, then another lick followed by another dip, until the end of the stick had collected a thick layer of pink, purple, green, or reddish sugar. The powder looked almost weightless inside the packet, but it carried enough colour to stain a tongue mark the corners of a mouth, and leave fingerprints on any school paper unfortunate enough to be nearby. This was not candy designed for efficiency. A chocolate bar could disappear in several bites. Fun Dip turned a few spoonfuls of flavoured sugar into an afternoon activity. The white stick, known as a liquor sticks, felt harder and denser than ordinary pressed candy. It was sweet enough to eat alone, though children understood that its main responsibility was carrying powder from the packet to the mouth. A dry stick collected very little. One careful lick created the necessary surface. The child then pressed it into the powder, moved it from side to side, and lifted it for inspection. Too little meant another dip. Too much created a mound that might fall onto a shirt before reaching its destination. The first few rounds were neat because the stick remained long and easy to hold. As it shortened, fingertips moved closer to the damp end, the powder began clinging to the packet's edges and the operation became less dignified. By then, dignity had already left the room. The child was holding a wet piece of sugar, repeatedly returning it to a paper compartment filled with more sugar, and regarding this as a perfectly reasonable system. Lick-M-Aid had existed before the familiar Fun Dip format, originally offering flavoured powder, without the white dipping stick. Children could pour the powder onto the tongue, eat it from a finger, or improvise another method. In 1973, the product was reworked as Fun Dip with the edible liquor sticks, transforming loose candy powder into a structured ritual. That small addition changed everything. The stick slowed the process, reduced the need to tip the entire packet toward the mouth, and gave the candy a recognizable action that could be demonstrated in advertising or explained instantly to a friend. It also created 2 treats inside one package. The flavored powder disappeared first, but the dipping stick remained edible. A child could save it for last bite it between flavors, or finish half the stick before realizing that the remaining powder now required a shorter instrument. Planning mattered. The candy provided no replacement tool for anyone who ate the equipment too early. Multiple flavors created another layer of decision. A child might begin with cherry, move to grape, and save lime for the final compartment, or follow whichever order produced the strongest color on the stick. Mixing was inevitable. After several dips, one powder crossed into another, creating purple streaks in the red section, and green crystals clinging to everything. Some children attempted to keep the flavors separate by licking the stick completely clean between compartments. Others dragged it through 2 colors, deliberately producing combinations that had never been approved by a candy laboratory. Sharing required even greater flexibility. One friend could receive a turn with the same stick, but this depended on standards of hygiene that changed dramatically when no adults were present. The more cautious method was to pour powder into another child's palm. The less cautious method was simply called friendship. The packet travelled well only while unopened. Once the top had been torn away, the powder became vulnerable to gravity, wind elbows, and every sudden movement associated with childhood. A Fun Dip opened at a kitchen table could remain reasonably controlled. One opened on a bicycle school bus, playground, or back seat became an experiment in coloured dust. The paper compartments folded inward, the powder gathered in the corners, and a careless squeeze sent a small cloud onto clothing. Moisture made matters worse. A damp stick touched the edge of the packet and turned loose crystals into a hard, sticky ridge. Children scraped this material free because no visible candy was considered beyond recovery. By the end, the package contained several stubborn patches of coloured sugar, and the stick had become too short to reach them comfortably. The final solution was obvious. Tilt the packet directly into the mouth and remove the last remaining pretense of procedure. Parents could view Fun Dip in 2 ways. It was a modestly sized candy that kept a child occupied far longer than many larger treats. It was also flavoured sugar supplied with a sugar utensil. The product made no serious effort to resemble fruit breakfast or an outdoor nutrition bar. Its purpose was pleasure, colour, and participation. This honesty helped it thrive in corner stores, Halloween bags, concession stands, and grocery checkout displays. Children often bought it with their own coins, which gave them control over the sequence and duration of the experience. A parent did not have to prepare anything, divide portions, or wash a dish. The cleanup arrived elsewhere, powder on the table, a bright tongue before dinner, and a sticky white fragment abandoned on a napkin after the child had extracted every preferred flavour. Fun Dip belonged to a larger 1970s world of candy that required action. Wax bottles had to be bitten and drained. Pop rocks had to be heard. Snackmate had to be pressed through a nozzle. Fun Dip demanded repetition. Its flavour was inseparable from the movement of hand to packet to mouth, and stick back into the next colour. The product did not disappear after the decade. It remained on candy shelves under later owners, carrying the old Lick-O-Maid name as part of its identity even as packages and flavour combinations changed. What became nostalgic was the earlier setting, a simple divided packet, one white stick-coloured powder collecting around the lips, and enough time after school to treat every dip as a separate decision. The final snack on the list offered a different kind of participation. A soft square of gum entered the mouth quietly, then expanded into a bubble large enough to hide a child's nose and dangerous enough to attach itself permanently to hair clothing or the underside of a school desk. The soft pink square felt different before it even reached the mouth. Most bubble gum of the period arrived as hard sticks, small wrapped pieces or dense chunks that required several determined minutes of chewing before they became flexible. Bubble yum was soft from the beginning. A child could press a piece between two fingers, bend it without breaking it, and smell the strong sweetness the moment the wrapper opened. Introduced by Lifesavers in 1973, the gum entered the decade with a promise contained almost entirely in its texture. It did not ask the jaw to complete a warm-up exercise. Within moments, the gum was smooth, stretchy, and ready for the real purpose of the purchase. Flavour mattered, but the important question was whether the piece could produce a bubble larger than the one made yesterday, larger than a friend's bubble, and preferably large enough to hide the lower half of the face before collapsing against it. Bubble blowing required a technique children explained with great confidence and inconsistent results. The gum had to be flattened against the tongue, pushed slightly through the lips, and inflated with a slow stream of air. Blow too quickly and the surface tore before the bubble grew. Blow too gently and nothing happened except a small pink mound that looked less impressive than promised. A successful bubble expanded from the mouth into a smooth, shining sphere, trembling slightly as it grew. Friends watched. Measurements were estimated without rulers. Someone always claimed a previous bubble had been larger. The final moment came when the gum reached its limit and burst, sometimes returning neatly to the mouth, but more often spreading across the lips, nose, cheeks, and any nearby strand of hair. Pulling it away required patience. Laughing made the work harder. A bubble attached to an eyebrow could turn a playground triumph into a visit with the school nurse. The package contained several large pieces, each individually wrapped, and substantial enough to feel like a complete project. One piece might be enough, but children often believed two would improve bubble size. This increased the amount of gum in the mouth without guaranteeing an equal increase in skill. Cheeks bulged. Speech became difficult. Teachers reminded students that gum was not allowed in class, while desks and chair bottoms revealed that enforcement had never been complete. A child caught chewing might be ordered to throw the gum away after only a few minutes, a punishment that seemed especially severe when the flavour remained strong. Others tried to hide it beneath the tongue answer questions without moving the jaw, or swallow it before being noticed. Swallowing gum brought its own collection of warnings from adults, many involving the number of years it would supposedly remain inside the body. Childhood rumour had found another durable home. Bubble yum attracted an even stranger rumour during the late 1970s. Stories spread among children that the gum contained spider eggs, a claim entirely false, but vivid enough to travel through schools, neighbourhoods, and family conversations without newspapers, social media, or any reliable witness. The details changed with every retelling. Someone knew a child who had found something in the gum. Someone's cousin had heard it from a teacher. Someone else had stopped buying it but could not explain exactly why. The Lifesavers Company responded publicly, including newspaper advertisements rejecting the story. The episode showed how quickly playground information could move when it combined candy disgust and a secret ingredient adults had supposedly failed to notice. Bubble yum survived the rumour, but many children remembered the story almost as clearly as the original pink package. Pop Rocks had inspired tales of explosions. Bubble Yum received imaginary spiders. The 1970s schoolyard was remarkably productive when professional fact-checkers were absent. At home, the gum usually arrived through a small transaction, rather than as part of the family meal plan. It was chosen at a checkout counter, purchased at a drugstore handed out during Halloween, or bought with coins saved in a pocket. Parents had fewer practical reasons to approve than they did with granola bars or crackers. Bubble Yum did not settle hunger assist with lunch or pretend to contain breakfast. It offered flavor chewing and the possibility of a large bubble. That honesty made the request simple. The child wanted it because it was fun. The parent considered the price, the proximity of dinner, the condition of the car upholstery, and the family's previous experience removing gum from clothing. Permission often came with rules. Keep it in your mouth. Do not snap it. Do not give it to your younger brother. Wrap it before throwing it away. Every rule reflected an earlier event. The worst event involved hair. A bubble burst a younger sibling reached at the wrong moment, or a child fell asleep with gum still in the mouth, and the pink mass attached itself to several strands with astonishing commitment. Ice oil peanut butter. Careful combing and adult patience might be recruited for removal. Sometimes scissors entered the room, and the snack ended with a haircut no one had planned. Gum also found carpet bed frames, bicycle handles, coat pockets, and the underside of furniture. The product was soft enough to make excellent bubbles, and therefore soft enough to become part of the household wherever it was abandoned. Parents remembered the cleanup. Children remembered the bubble just before it burst. Both memories were accurate. Convenience had little role here. Bubble Yum created entertainment and someone else often handled the consequences. Bubble Yum never truly vanished. The brand changed owners and eventually became part of Hershey, while soft bubble gum became a familiar category, joined by competing products, larger flavor selections, and louder packages. What disappeared was the surprise of the first encounter when gum this soft seemed to have solved an important childhood problem. By the end of this list, the 1970s pantry looks crowded again. Foil-wrapped cakes beside oatmeal pies, a metal pudding cup waiting for its spoon, a Pringles can standing upright orange dust at the bottom of a chip bowl, granola crumbs on the car seat and frozen tubes pressed against the freezer wall. Some of these snacks disappeared. Some changed names. Others remained on store shelves but lost the particular place they once held in a lunchbox, a corner store, or a child's weekly negotiations. These 25 snacks were never shared equally by every American family. Budgets, regions, allergies, store access, household rules, and parental opinions shaped what entered each grocery cart. Yet the strongest memories often come from the smallest objects a wrapper opened at noon. Scissors cutting a freezer tube, a mother placing one cake beside a sandwich, or several children comparing the color of their tongues on the back steps. The food was processed, packaged, advertised, and sometimes difficult to defend with an adult palate. The moments around it were real. They belonged to ordinary people feeding children, managing money, saving time, and occasionally agreeing that one bright package could come home. The snack may have lasted 5 minutes. The story attached to it has lasted half a century, waiting quietly in the pantry of memory for someone to open the door again.